When Carl Jung spoke about the psyche, he never reduced human relationships to simple labels. He did not see people as villains or victims in a shallow sense. He saw relationships as mirrors, as symbolic encounters between unconscious forces that want to be seen, integrated, and transformed. When we speak about what people call a soul bond, especially in connection with narcissistic relationships, we are not speaking about something mystical in a fantasy sense. We are speaking about a powerful, psychological attachment that forms when two unconscious wounds recognize each other and lock together. A soul bond is not created by love alone. It is created by intensity. It is created when longing meets validation, when emptiness meets attention, and when unhealed parts of the psyche finally feel seen, even if only temporarily. Jung would say that what we are truly attached to in these bonds is not the other person, but the projection we place upon them. We fall in love not with who they are, but with what they activate inside us. In narcissistic dynamics, the bond forms quickly because the narcissistic individual unconsciously mirrors what the other person longs to see. This is not always deliberate manipulation in the conscious sense. Often, it is an instinctive survival pattern rooted in their own fractured self. Jung described the narcissistic structure as a fragile ego, inflated to protect a deeply wounded core. This ego cannot tolerate shame, vulnerability, or true intimacy, and yet paradoxically, it desperately needs admiration and emotional supply to feel real. The other person in the bond, often empathic, emotionally open, or self-reflective, carries a different wound. They may have learned early in life that love must be earned. That connection requires effort, or that emotional depth comes with instability. When these two structures meet, something electric happens. The empath sees potential. The narcissist sees validation, and a powerful projection begins. Jung called this projection the anima or animus projection, depending on the polarity. It is the unconscious image of the ideal, other that we place onto someone who appears to carry the missing parts of ourselves. This is why the bond feels spiritual, destined, or cosmic. The psyche experiences it as a reunion with something lost. But what is lost is not the other person. It is a disowned part of the self. At the beginning of such relationships, the bond feels intoxicating. Conversations feel endless. Eye contact feels charged. Time collapses. This happens because the unconscious is activated. The nervous system is stimulated. Dopamine and oxytocin flood the body. But beneath the chemistry, something deeper is occurring. The narcissistic individual is absorbing admiration and identity from the other, while the other person is attaching their sense of meaning, worth, and emotional fulfillment to the narcissist's attention. Jung warned that when projections remain unconscious, they inevitably lead to disillusionment. No human being can permanently carry another person's unconscious ideal, and when the narcissist can no longer sustain the image, when admiration turns into expectation, or when vulnerability is required, the structure collapses. This is when the so-called breaking of the soul bond occurs. But here's the truth that is rarely spoken. The narcissist does not break the bond because they suddenly become cruel. The bond breaks because intimacy threatens their psychological survival. True intimacy requires the ego to soften. It requires accountability, empathy, and the willingness to see oneself clearly. For the narcissistic structure, this feels like annihilation. Jung would describe this as ego fragmentation. The narcissist experiences closeness not as safety, but as exposure. They begin to feel engulfed, judged, or inadequate. Even if the other person is doing nothing wrong, the very depth that once attracted them now triggers their deepest fears. And so, they withdraw, devalue, detach, or disappear. To the person on the receiving end, this feels brutal, sudden, incomprehensible. One day there was intensity, affection, and connection. The next day there is coldness, distance, or indifference. The psyche struggles to make sense of this rupture, because the bond was experienced as real, meaningful, and deeply emotional. Jung would say that what hurts most is not the loss of the narcissist, but the collapse of the projection. The image you held shatters. The future you imagined dissolves. And suddenly, you are left face to face with your own wounded inner world that had been temporarily soothed by the bond. This is why the pain feels existential. It is not simply heartbreak. It is a loss of identity. The psyche says, "Who am I now without this connection?" And this is precisely the moment where transformation becomes possible, though it rarely feels that way at first.com. The narcissist, on the other hand, experiences the bond breaking differently. While they may appear unaffected, indifferent, or even relieved, something else is happening beneath the surface. Jung emphasized that whatever is repressed does not disappear. It sinks into the unconscious and expresses itself indirectly. The narcissist may distract themselves with new attention, new admiration, or new relationships. But the unresolved projection remains. Before moving to next part, if you find this video helpful, take a moment to like this video and hit subscribe button. They do not grieve in a conscious, reflective way. Instead, they fragment. They compartmentalize. They move forward without integrating what occurred. This is why patterns repeat. This is why similar relationships form again and again. Without shadow integration, there is no learning, only repetition. The shadow, in Jungian psychology, is the part of the self that is denied, rejected, or disowned. In narcissistic structures, the shadow contains vulnerability, shame, dependency, and fear of inadequacy. Because these aspects are unbearable to face, they are projected outward. The narcissist unconsciously assigns these qualities to others and then rejects them. When the bond breaks, the narcissist often frames the other person as needy, dramatic, or unstable. This is not an objective assessment. It is a defense mechanism. It allows them to preserve their ego and avoid confronting their own emotional limitations. For the person who is bonded, the task is different. Jung believed that suffering becomes meaningful when it leads to consciousness. The breaking of the bond forces introspection. It forces the question, why did this attachment feel like life itself? What part of me was seeking completion through another? This is not self-blame. It is self-inquiring. The soul bond existed because something within you wanted to be healed. The narcissist merely activated it. They were not the source. They were the catalyst. As painful as this realization is, it is also liberating. Because what was projected outward can now be reclaimed inward. The passion, depth, intuition, creativity, and emotional capacity you attributed to the narcissist were always yours. They felt magnified because you saw them reflected back, but they did not originate from the other. Jung called this process individuation. It is the journey of becoming whole by integrating unconscious material into conscious awareness. Individuation often begins with heartbreak, disillusionment, or crisis. The psyche breaks down illusions so that truth can emerge. The breaking of the soul bond is not punishment. It is initiation. You are being asked to withdraw your projections and meet yourself honestly. To sit with the loneliness without anesthetizing it through fantasy. To feel grief without turning it into obsession. To recognize patterns without judging yourself for having them. This is where true power returns. Not through revenge, not through proving worth, and not through waiting for closure from someone incapable of giving it, but through self-possession. Jung said that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. The narcissistic bond feels fated because it arises from unconscious material. When you bring that material into awareness, the spell breaks. And when the spell breaks, something remarkable happens. The attachment loosens. The emotional charge diminishes. The obsessive thoughts fade, not because you force them away, but because they no longer serve a psychological function. You no longer need the narcissist to validate your depth, your sensitivity, or your worth. You no longer confuse intensity with intimacy. You no longer mistake longing for love. This does not mean you become hardened or closed. On the contrary, you become more discerning. You learn to recognize when connection is mutual rather than one-sided. You learn to sense when someone is present rather than performative. You learn that real intimacy feels steady, not destabilizing. The narcissist, if they ever reflect at all, may feel an emptiness they cannot name. They may remember flashes of the bond, moments of connection that felt real despite their defenses, but without shadow work, these moments are buried beneath distraction. Jung would not demonize them. He would say they are trapped in their own unconsciousness. And yet compassion does not require self-sacrifice. Understanding does not mean returning. Awareness does not mean reopening wounds. The bond is broken so that you can come home to yourself. What once felt like divine connection now becomes inner integration. What once felt like abandonment becomes initiation. What once felt like loss becomes liberation. This is the deeper meaning of the soul bond breaking. It is not the end of love. It is the end of illusion. And when illusion ends, truth begins. To watch more informative videos like this, kindly like the video, leave a comment, and hit subscribe button. If you would like to support my channel and help me make longer videos, there is a link in description to buy me a coffee.